Know, O Prince, that between the years when the oceans drank Atlantis and the gleaming cities, and the years of the rise of the sons of Arias, there was an age undreamed of, when shining kingdoms lay spread across the world like blue mantles beneath the stars. This, the beginning of RobertEHoward's most famous poem, is our introduction to the Cimmerian, with Phoenix on the sword. It was made more well known by the inclusion of a small fragment of it in the 1982 movie. Before I get any further in, I want to warn viewers that there will be spoilers. I expect that most of you have already read it, but if you haven't, I don't want to spoil your fun. The full version of this poem hints at a world already developed, or at least well thought out, and our hero feels alive, bursting out of the page with barbaric energy. It's a little odd that such a developed story world and character could confront us in the very first appearance of Conan. In the book The Coming of Conan, Patrice Louinet wrote that Howard wrote the poem Cimmeria in February of 1932, while in the misty and sullen hills of Fredericksburg. The rest of the Hyborian age grew out of his love and considerable knowledge of history and mythology. He didn't want a historical world for Conan, but an era lost to time and repeating many of the same patterns as our real history. Some of the credit should go to Farnsworth Wright, though, the long-time editor of Weird Tales. As I understand it, he asked Howard to flesh out the Hyborian age somewhat and write it up in his story before publication. So on to Conan himself. In a letter to Clark Ashton Smith, Howard wrote that Conan simply grew out of my mind a few years ago when I was stopping in a little border town on the lower Rio Grande. Conan grew in Howard's mind over a period of about 9 months. Of course, Conan and other Howard characters grew up in a post-World War I, Great Depression atmosphere of an oil town in boom and then bust. Was Conan an amalgam of characters found across Cross Plains, Texas? I had some trouble in finding the exact location of the quote, but damndest bastard on Twitter came through. Howard often described how Conan had sprung up in his mind fully formed while on holiday. A combination of various prize fighters, gunmen, bootleggers, oil field bullies, gamblers, and honest workmen. But he confided in Novaline Price that this was a stock answer, and his character's origins were a mystery to him. And while he might have had the initial idea for Conan during the Rio Grande vacation with Clyde Tevis Smith, it took him a while to get a handle on the character and in his world. And that's from RobertEHoward, The Lost Celt. L. Sprague de Camp claimed that Howard imagined Conan as a real-life barbarian who would stand behind him and narrate while he simply typed out the stories under threat of his axe. "Write faster, Robert!" Of course, he said this and quite a few other things as well. Some people think that de Camp intentionally defamed Howard to justify his writing his pastiches and his rewrites. I won't go down that rabbit hole any further in this video because a truly cyclopean hole it is. The de Camp Howard issue is a spicy meatball, and I would need a whole video to go over even the basics. And I don't want to go down on the wrong side of this guy's broadsword. By the way, If you like what you see, please consider subscribing to my channel and smashing that thumbs up button. I talk about sword and sorcery, indie, Iron Age books, book reviews, and updates on my own novels. Citadel of Seven Swords and Weird of the Skull Totem. They're on Amazon right now. Thanks. So, the Phoenix on the Sword was the first time readers met Conan. Except it wasn't. Conan first appears in a short story by Howard, first published in the June 1930 issue of Strange Tales of Mystery and Terror. This character was originally conceived of in October of 1931. I came to Dagon's cave to kill Richard Brent, says the narrator and the protagonist of the story. The protagonist is knocked out inside a cave and dreams, or recalls, a past life. The woman he loves, Eleanor Bland, becomes Tamara. Richard Brent, his rival, becomes Vertorix. They are both native Britons. And the protagonist, John O'Brien, becomes Conan the Reaver, the black-haired Gael, an Irish pirate. A thought that struck me after reading People of the Dark. Did Robert E. Howard ever intend Conan to be a sort of eternal champion in the way that Moorcock later wrote? Civilizations rise and fall, and time has a cyclic nature in Robert's writing. Was it the same way with Conan? Was it the same way with the characters? Was he a man living out one life after the next as some sort of avatar of eternal battle? Maybe, maybe not, but it's a compelling idea to me. So, Conan didn't quite appear out of nowhere. And now we'll get on to the story itself. As I said, spoilers, so go read it first. Chapter 1. The tale begins with an as-you-know kind of scene. 6 conspirators come together in the dead of the night to go over their plan. Ascalante, a dispossessed count with little to lose, has blackmailed the sorcerer Thoth Amon. Stripped of his magic ring and his powers, he is a slave and does not much appreciate it. The other conspirators are the Rebel Four. Dion, the decadent and largely useless Baron of Vitalis, who hopes to gain the crown. Volmana, the dwarf count of Caraban, who wishes to court Dion's favor. Grommel, the gigantic commander of the Black Legion, who wants control of the military. And Ronaldo, a famed and possibly unhinged bard, who sees Conan as a barbarian, unfit to rule Aquilonia. Plots are unfolded and described, but we also see that there is a mistrust among the 6. This chapter is one of Howard's weaker pieces. There is a plot, but the scene is fairly flat. Now we'd call it an info dump. Howard's prose, however, comes in swinging. The chapter starts with, "Over shadowy spires and gleaming towers lay the ghostly darkness and silence that runs before the dawn." And it ends with, "Over jeweled spires was rising a dawn as crimson as blood." Absolute bangers. Chapter 2. Conan and Prospero talk. We see Conan as thoughtful and appreciative of the arts. Is this Howard's own view on the subject? Might be a holdover from the Cull story, By This Axe I Rule, which is very much the same story with a few additions. Conan's intelligence is on full display. By the way, how nuts is it that Weird Tales rejected By This Axe I Rule? It's a great story, although I think this one's better. The quality of pulp writing is to be reckoned with. Conan speaks of his appreciation for poetry and song in a way that is uncharacteristically sentimental. Conan shook his lion head. "No, Prospero, he is beyond my reach. A great poet is greater than any king. His songs are mightier than my scepter, for he has near ripped the heart from my breast when he chose to sing for me. I shall die and be forgotten, but Ronaldo's songs will live forever. I feel that Conan's personality is heavily influenced by the more philosophical Kull. I don't suggest that Conan is dumb, but in other stories he takes on a much more practical bent. Of course, here we have an older Conan who has taken the duties of kingship seriously, and he is no longer a thief and a reaver. When Conan spares Ronaldo, that shows a rare side to his personality that we don't much see in other tales. I wouldn't call Conan soft, but he seems more open to the better fruits of civilization. Conan strongly desires action. What keeps him in his place? He also senses a trap and sees organization in what others might see as mere coincidence. Conan is shown to be a healing influence in the corrupt civilization of Aquilonia. His barbarian sensibilities guide him, honorable, strong, vital, and undegraded. Nonetheless, the forces of corrupt civilization stand in his way. Ronaldo, of course, whose threat Conan does not gauge correctly. When I overthrew Numidides, then I was the liberator. Now they spit at my shadow. They have put a statue of that swine in the temple of Mitra, and people go and wail before it, hailing it as the holy effigy of a saintly monarch who was done to death by a red-handed barbarian. The benefactors of corruption work against Conan in subtle ways, and the people follow too easily. This is a theme throughout Howard's work. Civilization corrodes and is swept away. He goes on to talk about his people and his gods, as well as the northern lands. I think this is a bit of flavor for the world. Maybe Farnsworth had something to do with this. And it shows him open, if guarded, to new ways of thought. They have no hope here or in the hereafter, Conan answered. Their gods are Crom and his dark race, who rule over a sunless place of everlasting mist, which is the world of the dead. Mitra! The ways of the Aesir were more to my liking. Does this mean that Howard thinks there must be a balance struck between the civilized and the savage spirit? He was very well versed in history and mythology, and in all the old tales there was a lot of power in the civilized, wild, or man-animal connection, or dichotomy, whatever you want to call it. Chiron the centaur was a teacher of Jason, Hercules, Asclepios, and Achilles. The Minotaur was punishment for Minos' greed, and Romulus and Remus, the founders of Rome, were raised by wolves. And this last example is pertinent to the story, and Aquilonia is arguably Howard's pre-cataclysmic Rome. Chapter 2 unpacks a lot of info as well. I think it runs a little smoother than Chapter 1, but it is also a counterpart of it, an info dump for the protagonists. Chapter 3. Here's where the action really kicks in. Thoth Amon and Dion are in a garden. Thoth reveals his lack of trust for Ascalante and tries to deal separately with Dion. But Dion, lost in his own fears and seeing no value in those beneath him, hardly listens. But when Thoth Amon speaks of his ring, Dion reacts immediately. He desires his own ring, his lucky ring, which turns out to be the very ring stolen from Thoth. Ring? Ring? Thoth had underestimated the man's utter egoism. Dion had not even been listening to the slave's word. So completely engrossed was he in his own thoughts, but the final word stirred a ripple of his own self-centeredness. We see that Thoth thinks as little of Dion as Dion thinks of him, and he is soon dead. With his ring restored to him, Thoth Amon is giddy with revenge. He summons a baboon-like demon and orders it to horribly kill Ascalante and everyone else with him. There was a movement in the air about him, such as a swirl as is made in water when some creature rises to the surface. A nameless, freezing wind blew on him briefly, as if from an open door. Thoth felt a presence at his back, but he did not look about. He kept his eyes fixed on the moonlight space of marble, on which a tenuous shadow hovered. As he continued his whispered incantations, this shadow grew in size and clarity until it stood out, distinct and horrific. Its outline was not unlike that of a gigantic baboon, but no such baboon ever walked the earth, not even in Stygia. Ooh. What chilling prose gives me the willies. If I said Howard writes horror as well and maybe even better than Lovecraft, I might make a few people angry, or at least give them the vague feeling of existential dread, which is what they like. So you're welcome. Chapter 4. Conan has a weird dream that has a clear Lovecraftian tone to it. He meets Epimetheus, a sage dead 1,500 years, and in a chamber deep in the Golamira mountains, where no one has set foot in centuries. Conan wonders why the sage would help him. "I am an outlander and a barbarian," says Conan. Epimetheus explains, "Your destiny is one with Aquilonia. Gigantic happenings are forming in the web and the womb of fate, and a blood-mad sorcerer shall not stand in the path of imperial destiny." He traces a phoenix symbol on Conan's sword to aid him, not against men, but supernatural foes. Why a phoenix? In this chapter, Howard makes the clear connection between the savage and civilization. Why would the sage help a red-handed outlander? I feel he is saying that Conan has given rebirth to the empire, a barbarian who kills the rotten old king and usurps him, tears out a rotten heart. His vitality and his freshness replace the old king's decadence and depravity. Chapter 5. What do I know of cultured ways, the guilt, the craft, and the lie? I, who was born in a naked land and bred in the open sky. The subtle tongue, the sophist guile, they fail when the broadsword sings. Rush in and die, dogs! I was a man before I was a king. Now things really start to rip. The conspirators and their mercenaries, 20 in total, burst in on Conan and are surprised to find him ready, armed, and partially armored. A battle ensues. Conan fights like a tiger, of course, but he is badly outnumbered. Conan's sword breaks, but the phoenix remains. He fights with an axe plucked from the wall. This follows the pattern of by this axe I rule. I wonder if Howard meant this to symbolize something, or was it merely lifted from one story to another? Either way, the action feels present and dangerous, as Howard writes these scenes so well. "Who dies first?" he mumbled through smashed and bloody lips. He takes terrible wounds, but slays many. Even now, he is still loath to kill Ronaldo. Wounded badly, he prepares to fight to the death. At this point, the demon appears and makes quick work of all the conspirators. Then it attacks Conan, and he survives only by his quick reflexes. Conan felt his soul shrivel and begin to be drawn out of his body, to drown in the yellow wells of cosmic horror which glimmered spectrally in the formless chaos that was growing about him and engulfing all life and all sanity. Those eyes grew and became gigantic, and in them the Cimmerian glimpsed the reality of all the abysmal and blasphemous horrors that lurk in the outer darkness of the formless voids and nighted gulfs. Just an interjection here. Howard really gives us a visceral and unsafe feeling, a glimpse of an almost superhuman man pushed to the brink. This is the kind of Howardian magic I love. Back to the story. The axe has no effect on the thing, but it seems by chance he grabs the broken sword and strikes the demon. It dies and leaves a horrible shape. The vital barbarian lives, and the plans of the civilized men die. A priest of Mitra, one of the few benevolent gods in the Hyborian age, reveals Conan's dream is real, and the hidden passage of Golamira is real. So some final thoughts. It has a bit of a slow start, and as you know, kind of feel to it. With a large cast of colorfully described villains, you might almost expect a whole novel from this. A dwarf, a giant, a mad bard, a cowardly nobleman. They don't get enough airtime, to say nothing of Thothamon. These negatives are mollified by Howard's fantastic prose. Beautiful and mysterious scenes and characters. There's too much in too little. And I guess you can take that as a good thing. Certain modern authors would stretch this out over 3 books. So, this story is the first time Conan of Cimmeria is seen in print, leaping larger than life off the page. This is not Howard's best work, but even his mid-work is leagues above most others. So, if I were to give it a star on Amazon, rating on Amazon, I would give it 5 stars, of course. We're going to give it something else. We're going to rate it in terms of other Conan stories. So this one I'm going to give 3 demon baboons out of 5. I want to give thanks to Amber the Lion, the damndest bastard you ever met, and Mark Finn for reaching out to me with helpful advice on Twitter. Thanks, guys. So, next up, the Scarlet Citadel. I'm Eric Wag, and thank you for watching.
Fight forever! I'm with them! This is incredible!